had to be taken during the summer of 1963 because, as you know, President Kennedy was assassinated in November of that year. As you know, Bill Clinton was elected President of the United States in 1992. And to acknowledge the defeat of George Bush, Time magazine named Bill Clinton Man of the Year in January of 1993. By the way, please notice what Time did when they placed Bill Clinton's picture in front of the letter M in the word Time. They strategically placed his head in such a way as to show the two lines of the letter M as being horns on top of his head. Were they trying to tell us something? But in truth, Time magazine should have named these two men as Men of the Year, President John Kennedy and Professor Carroll Quigley, the two men who made Bill Clinton President of the United States. Just so you know, I would like to apologize to Time magazine. I took one of their covers and cut out its picture and made this cover myself. I don't want to get sued for claiming they made a cover when they didn't. Let me now discuss how these two men made Bill Clinton President of the United States. According to the October 19, 1992 U.S. News and World Report, Bill Clinton graduated from Hot Springs High School in 1964. He then went to Georgetown University later that year. If he completed his studies in 4 years, he would have graduated in 1968. Let me show you what Dr. Quigley taught young Bill Clinton while he was at Georgetown. Dr. Quigley wrote the book entitled Tragedy and Hope in 1966 when Bill Clinton was a student there. This is a poor quality photocopy of the Georgetown Alumnus magazine for the winter of 1993, meaning 25 years after Bill Clinton graduated. It says that the book entitled Tragedy and Hope was required reading for Dr. Quigley's course. That means that Bill Clinton read this book while he was at Georgetown, and we can now read what Bill read. The inside dust cover says that Dr. Quigley was the professor of history at the Foreign Service School at Georgetown University, and that he formerly taught at Princeton and Harvard. He received his PhD from Harvard as well. So Dr. Quigley is what you would call a liberal establishment professor. Now let's see what Dr. Quigley taught young Bill Clinton. This is taken from page 950 of Tragedy and Hope. There does exist and has existed for a generation, meaning back to around 1920, an international Anglophile network which operates, by the way, the word Anglophile means primarily English. To some extent, in the way the radical right believes the Communist Act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as the Round Table groups, has no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other group, and frequently does so. I know of the operations of this network because I studied it for 20 years, meaning back to just after World War II, and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. And listen now to this incredible confession. I have no aversion to it or most of its instruments, but in general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown. And I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known. And that is why he titled his book Tragedy and Hope. This network has brought the world immense tragedy, but that they are the hope of the world. This is an absolutely staggering statement because this conspiracy planned World War II, which started in 1941, but planned it as early as 1920. And that war murdered 53 million people because this network wanted to create the United Nations. And Dr. Quigley has no aversion to that. And notice that if Bill Clinton did not rebuke the views of Dr. Quigley, as he did not, that means that Bill Clinton also has no aversion to the murder of 53 million people to give the people of the world the United Nations. That shows you just how evil this conspiracy is. And this quote comes from page 24 of Tragedy and Hope. The powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim. Nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country, and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled by the central banks of the world. And by the way, just so you know, the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank is America's central bank. And these banks act in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent meetings and conferences. And here on page 954, Dr. Quigley admits that this conspiracy actually controls American communism, if not worldwide communism. It was this group of people who provided much of the framework and influence which the communist sympathizers and fellow travelers took over in the United States in the 1930s. It must be recognized that the power that these energetic left-wingers exercised was never their own power or communist power, but was ultimately the power of the international financial coterie. It now becomes appropriate to introduce you to Cecil Rhodes, one of the many people that Dr. Quigley identified as being one of these conspirators. Quigley says Mr. Rhodes feverishly exploited the diamond and gold fields of South Africa and rose to be the Prime Minister of Cape Colony between 1890 and 1896. In fact, the African nation of Rhodesia was named after Cecil Rhodes. That nation is now called Zimbabwe. In the middle 1890s, Rhodes had an annual personal income of over $5 million, which was spent so freely for his mysterious purposes, and they centered on his desire to bring all the habitable portions of the world under their control. For this purpose, Rhodes left part of his great fortune to found the Rhodes Scholarships at Oxford. So where did Bill Clinton go after graduation from Georgetown in 1968? This is once again page 36 of the U.S. News and World Report article for October the 19th, 1992. And it shows that from 1968 to 1970, Bill Clinton was at Oxford studying as a Rhodes scholar. Dr. Quigley then explained on page 582 what the Rhodes Scholarship Organization did in America. They set up a Council on Foreign Relations in New York. And then on page 950, Quigley taught Mr. Clinton. The American branch of this organization, meaning the Council on Foreign Relations, has played a very significant role in the history of the United States. So in 1988, several years after he returned to America, Bill Clinton joined the Council on Foreign Relations. And then in 1992, the Council on Foreign Relations delivered the election to President Bill Clinton. And the last quote I would like to bring to your attention is this one found on page 73 of Tragedy and Hope. Dr. Quigley wrote, "The business interests expected to control both political parties equally. Indeed, some of them intended to contribute to both and allow an alternation of the two parties in public office. That means that the Democrats would be in office for 8 years, and then the Republicans would be in office for 8 years, pretty much the same as America has been doing since the 1920s. The Republicans held the presidency under Ronald Reagan for 8 years, from 1981 to 89. The Democrats held the presidency under Bill Clinton for 8 years, from 1993 to 2001. And then George Bush was elected to 2 terms, which means he left office in 2009. And then, due to the alternating party practice, America will elect a Democrat for 8 years. And they did. They elected Barack Obama a Democrat. All because there is an international network that controls both parties equally. Now let me continue with Quigley's answer to the question, why do they want to alternate the two parties in power? Dr. Quigley taught Mr. Clinton in order to conceal their own influence, inhibit any exhibition of independence by politicians, and to allow the electorate to believe they were exercising their own free choice. I hope you can see just how important what Dr. Quigley just wrote is. We think that we, the people, are in control of our elections, that we select the best candidate from amongst the candidates who run for the presidency, and that we change things when we put the other party in office after we decide that the previous party has failed us. But Dr. Quigley says that they select the 2 candidates and then we elect one, and they win no matter who is elected. Please notice the contempt this conspiracy has for the people of the United States. We think we are electing our president, but they know that we dummies are too stupid to figure it out and get us to select a candidate from the 2 they selected for us. And they have been getting away with it ever since the 1920s. And to show you that the statement that both parties are controlled by the same people is true, let me show you the evidence that President George Bush, the father, intentionally threw the election of 1992 to Bill Clinton. There is a universal rule in politics whether you are running for the presidency of the United States or for dog catcher of Tucson. And by the way, I ran for the dog catcher in Tucson in 1996. This was one of my street signs. Unfortunately, I didn't win, but I don't think it was my campaign slogan of vote early and often that had anything to do with it. But let me get back to what I was saying. There is a universal rule in national, state, and local politics, and that is never, never, never promise a tax increase. You can talk about increasing benefits or adding new bureaus, but you never, never, never tell the electorate